Hello, class. Wherever you are, I want to welcome you to Principles of Management Study Module number 4. To begin, I hope you had the opportunity to read my introductory video that I posted a couple of days ago, essentially praising all of you for the good job you've been doing and explaining what you could expect in this module. So why don't we begin? And again, we'll visit our learning objectives, which are really the same three that we've been working with all along. We still have two more to go in our course. So before we begin our lesson, let's review a little bit some of the things that we discussed, important things in module number 3. First of all, we had broken the categories of management theory into 4 groups: the classic, the modern, the classic administrative, and the behavioral management. Essentially, what we were talking about is a delineation of concepts that had to do with a work that was manual, and the process could be examined very carefully and improved. And then, of course, we had the classic administrative, which was basically the soft side of running a business and people. And then we had the modern scientific, which we're going to go over here, and then behavioral management. So, excuse me, stay tuned for these two over here on the right. We also talked about, again, these categories, and we showcased a couple of the pioneers. And as I mentioned, you can find under the Files tab a lot of information about these pioneers. So one of my favorites is Douglas McGregor, and I just touched on him very briefly at the end of our last session. But he had examined the way managers see employees, and he had divided managers into 2 categories. One was the Theory X type of a manager, which basically believed the following. And if you see, these are in categories of attitude, direction, their approach to responsibility, motivation, and creativity. Over on the left-hand side, again, in those categories, you see people dislike work. They find it boring, and they will avoid it if they can. McGregor thought these types of managers believe people must be forced or bribed to make the right effort. He also stated that this type of manager believes that the employees would rather be directed than accept responsibility, and that people are motivated mainly by money, and most people have little creativity. So this is kind of a negative and jaded view of a workforce that is expressed by a Theory X type of manager. So the Theory Y manager, in terms of attitude, he believes that people need to work and want to make an interest in it, or take an interest in it. And under the right conditions, they can enjoy it. He believes that people are self-directive towards a target that they accept. He believes that this type of manager believes that people will seek and accept responsibility, and that under the right conditions, people are motivated by the desire to realize their own potential. And then from a creativity point of view, creativity and ingenuity are widely distributed and grossly underused. So you can see 2 points of view which really would manifest themselves in whether a boss was autocratic and directive, or a boss might be cooperative, team player, one that works with his employees to enable them to enjoy the workplace and then also reach their potential. So again, this was the way MacArthur saw things. We also talked about some of the contents of Maslow, and then McGregor. When you compare the two, And here are some questions. Do you believe that people are trustworthy? Do you believe that people seek responsibility? That they look for meaning? That they want to learn? That people won't resist change? Do you believe that people prefer to work before being idle? Or do you believe that people strive to reach a level of self-actualization? So the truth is, what a manager or supervisor or leaders think about their workforce will have an impact on how they treat them. And a workforce that's been developed to be engaged will certainly be treated differently by management than a workforce that's disengaged. So let's begin with module number 4. And I hope you can see some of these pieces of the management puzzle coming together. So let's take a look at these categories of management: modern scientific and behavioral management. Now, here is a professor of management at UCLA, and his name is William Oishi. Now, Oishi was very interested in why Japanese management had produced such a successful presence in the market and overtaken many manufacturers in America. So basically, let me give you a little bit of a background for him before I begin. He is essentially a researcher in the field of business management, and he's a professor at the Anderson Graduate School of Management at UCLA, and also he's done some work with USC. Oishi wrote the book called Theory Z: How Americans Can Meet the Japanese Challenge. Now, what he promulgated in his book, in Theory Z, is that, first of all, he compared it to Theory X and Y. And those are the theories that were created by Douglas McGregor. But over here, on this side, he, looking at things through the lens of Japanese management, created what he called Theory Z. So this, according to him, is a management style that focuses on a strong company philosophy, a distinct corporate culture, long-range staff development, and consensus decision making. So these are some of the principles of Theory X according to Oishi. Also, some of the more important parts had to do with these things, these assertions, that Theory Z manifests itself in a view of work, that work is a whole part of a person. He believed that responsibility was collective. Not only do you owe it to your customers, to yourself, but to your coworkers. He believed that there was an attitude towards innovation and the ability to control, implicit control by loyalty to the team. In other words, how these workers and managers and leaders felt towards one another. So I believe I was a perfect example of this line of thinking. More or less, I joined the company when I was 27, and I was there 35 years, and then I served as an advisor for a few. But I was one of those folks that was what you would call a fast track nowadays. And I fit into that mold of rapid promotion for people they identify as high achievers. That there's a holistic concern by management of not only the people, but society and also the company itself. And then there's another concept that's very important, was the spirit of wa, which is seeking harmony with other workers. And you're going to see that, and you already have seen, that some of the past pundits that we had studied believed in cliques and relationships with other workers, which they consider to be very important. So too was this concept within the Japanese management community. Another thing was there was less specialization of career paths. So, for example, again, using me as an example, I started out in the engineering department, moved into being a technical instructor, then became a district manager covering large chunks of the United States, calling on dealerships. After that, I would switch, believe it or not, to power equipment, which was lawnmowers, snow throwers, string cutters, you name it. I was there for a few years. Then I went to auto service, where I was in charge of a field operation. And then later, all service operations, which would be consumer affairs, warranty, training, development, field operations, engineering, etc. And then I moved over to auto sales, where I was for 5 years as a national sales manager. Then back again to not only being in charge of service, but also the parts and logistics operation. So there were people like me that moved through the organization this way, that way, that way, in order to give them all sorts of experience so that ultimately they could contribute more to the company. So Theory Z was based upon Japanese management principles. Some of them had to do with long-term employment. So a lot of people would say it was impossible to get fired in a Japanese company. Well, the concept originally was that once you were a valued member of the company, you were welcome until you retired. Another interesting thing, though, is they always were interested in having early retirement so you could get out of the way if you were a higher up and make room for this next generation of managers. And then, of course, decision making had to be consensual. You know, in Japan is what they call a collective environment, collective society where people do things together and make decisions together. Just go to Disneyland or somewhere like that, and you'll see large groups of Japanese people touring the park. And this is the way that they make decisions. Give you an example. One time I was being promoted, I think it was to a vice president. And my boss said to me, Jim, you have to fly to Japan tomorrow. And you have to go to what he called a BRAC meeting. I said, BRAC? He goes, BRAC. I said, what is BRAC? You know, Japanese have a hard time pronouncing L's. Then he writes it down, black hair, meaning it was the board of directors for Honda Motor. Sure enough, I get out there. It's a breakfast meeting. The president's there. And I'm sitting at this U-shaped table with about 20 other executives. And the president goes around the table asking people questions, you know, sharing goodwill. He comes to me. Excuse me. Hey, Jim, how's it going? He asked me a couple of questions, which really didn't mean anything. And then the meeting was over. And I flew back to Japan from Japan the next day, and said to my boss, "What was that all about?" He said, "Jim-san, we can never make a decision without people even seeing you or hearing you. So it was important that they all saw me, maybe even heard me speak just 3 or 4 sentences even, but that fulfilled this drive that they have to have consensus on things and work collectively." Interesting story, right? So, and that happened to me numerous times, and other people like me that they consider to be fast trackers. So let's get into this behavior management, and we're talking about what does motivate workers. And some of you have done a nice job already in your discussions about what you feel creates an environment where people are motivated. So what does motivate people? Well, it could be any one of these things. But there are some people that were experts in their fields. It's interesting. Most of them went to Yale. I'll read you a little bit about their bios, but we'll talk about these motivational theorists. The first one is Clayton Alderfer, and he created what he called the ERG theory. Let me tell you a little more about him. He was born in Pennsylvania, my hometown. He received his BA in psychology from Yale, where he also obtained his PhD from Yale. So this ERG, what does it mean? Existence, relatedness, and growth. And as a psychologist, this is what he was interested in looking at and trying to figure out how the three fit together. And again, many of these things built on the theories of Abraham Maslow, where he was looking at, of course, Maslow was looking at the physical things before we get to the social, before we get to the top levels of achievement called self-actualization. So here we're talking about growth, relatedness, and existence. And again, he built his own pyramid almost like Maslow. And essentially, he's talking about similar things. Existence needs. That would be all material and physiological desires. That would be food, water, clothing, safety, physical love, and affection. That would really be Maslow's first two levels. Relatedness, he felt that this area encompassed social and external esteem, relationships with significant others like family, friends, co-workers, and employees. Employees, too. Remember the association of fellow workers. This also means to be recognized and feel secure as part of a group or a family. And that would be Maslow's third or fourth levels. And then, of course, growth needs. And that would be internal self-esteem and self-actualization. These impel a person to make creative or productive effects on himself and his environment. And that would be the self-actualization portion of Maslow's pyramid, where this area, the person strives to do something good for himself, for society, and to grow and develop. Okay, now we'll move on to David McClelland. Now look at the similarity with some of these people. Okay, again, he was a PhD from Yale. He had a master's degree from Wesleyan University, and also another degree as a PhD in the University of Missouri, and another experimental psychology degree from Yale. So again, he was a professional researcher. He created what was called the theory of needs. And this basically was a three-factor category of what it takes in order to be motivated. So again, this is similar in some respects, only different from Victor Vroom that we'll talk about in a minute. So McClelland claimed that motivation is a recurrent concern for a goal state or a condition as measured in this person's fantasy. And it basically has three particular motives. One, the need for achievement. Second, and this is a little different from others we'll study, the need for power. And the other one is the desire to be influential and be effective in an organization. So this is a person that's ambitious, and basically through this competency research, McClelland was able to pigeonhole these things as I just mentioned. And again, actions, thoughts, and feelings, as he pointed out, well, actions are really created by thoughts and feelings. Okay, so again, in his particular case, people seek power, affiliation, or achievement. So this type of a person would love to be promoted to a higher position, a wonderful carrot to dangle in front of them. He wants to have good affiliation with fellow employees and also those above and below, sideways. And then they have a sense of the need for achievement. So those are the three theories that he had created. And here they are. Now, the reason I show you this kind of a Venn graph is that any person just can't be one thing. Usually, there'll be different levels of desire in each of these categories. And I suppose if you had the right balance, you'd be the perfect employee or manager. And let's just go through each one. Now, the need for power is the need to be in charge, the need to influence others, and even if they're not in a position of management, they desire to be what is often referred to as informal leaders. You know who they are. You work in a group, but it always seems that one person has more influence over others, but does not have the position power in terms of rank. And this person needs competition, and they crave status. And as I said, if there was a disproportional balance within the person that had so much in this category, I would imagine they could be a pretty obnoxious individual and dislikable, requiring all of these different things. Now, on the other hand, what are the categories in McClelland's theory of affiliation? Well, friendship, companionship, social approval, to be to experience mutual understanding, and cooperation. And then, if you go to achievement, these type of people demonstrate the desire for accountability. They need rapid feedback. Am I doing a good job? Tell me how I'm doing. They need challenging goals, and they want to pursue things if those things have the likelihood of success built into them. So as you look at these things, which one are you? Which one of these three circles drive your behavior? Or maybe you're the perfect balance of the three. But knowing what makes people click can also enable a manager to interpret an individual and push their buttons. Sort of like, remember we discussed chess or checkers. That sort of thing, finding out what people's buttons are. So now we'll move on to J. Stacy Adams. And let me tell you a little bit about him. He basically had a PhD from the University of North Carolina. He was also a professor at Stanford and Columbia. He's also a research analyst in the U.S. Army. And his theory had to do with equity in job inputs versus output. So what did he say? He said that employees perceive what they get from a job situation, in other words, outcomes, in relationship to what they put into it. So therefore, if they think it's going to be something they do that's going to be beneficial, they'll be more inclined to do it. But if the employee receives a task that it seems pretty remote that there will be a success, they will not be inclined to do such a thing. So he believed this creates unnecessary work stress in the workplace. And again, this part here that I just clicked up has to do with a person asking themselves, am I doing more than the person next to me? Is this fair that I have to do this and he or she is not doing the same thing? So he believed in the workplace, if there wasn't that fairness, there was a possibility of hostility that would undermine the productivity of the entire workforce. Wow, you see how complicated this can be? And it all boils down to people and what drives them and how they exist within a work group. and how leaders and managers see things in their employees. So again, here's just an illustration, and it just underscores whether a person would be motivated to do a job. Am I the only one doing this? Is it possible to achieve it? What in God's green earth is fair for me? And this illustration basically talks about inputs, he called them. And basically, what I put into my job in time, effort, ability, loyalty, whatever, is worth it when you compare it to what I'm getting out of my job. You ever see those people that you approach them to be a supervisor, say, well, you know, we'd like to promote you. They go, hey, I don't want any more responsibility. They just don't want it. They don't think it's worth it. Or somebody else might say, yeah, well, do I get an increase in pay? Honda was very funny. A couple times I got larger assignments, and I'd be talking to a Japanese executive, and I'd say, so wait a minute. You want me to do this, this, and this starting when? Oh, Jim-san, now. Okay. Is this a promotion? No, Jim-san, just handshake promotion. But at that point, you know, I was part of the team, you know, and I was expected to do whatever was asked, kind of like being in the Army. So now we'll get to Victor Vroom, and some of you answered a question that I had put on the quiz. Was kind of a little ahead of what I'm teaching here, but you all got it correct, so that's good. So he received his doctorate from the University of Michigan. He was a professor, again, another Yale guy, and his theory was on motivational studies based upon personal beliefs of the people. So basically, it boiled down to the confidence of an employee might have to do the work. You know, Harry, Sally, I'd like you to take that over. And the employee might say, well, I don't know how to do that. And then the worst kind of manager would say, yeah, sure, you can do it. Then, of course, he was interested in rewards for performance and the value of the reward. Let me give you an example. We would try to put some type of a incentive together for employees for a 30-day period. And then I would say, okay, so what do we want to do? We want to reward them. What do we want to reward them with? And they'd say, well, let's give them a Starbucks card. And then I would say, well, what if they don't drink coffee or any of that stuff that Starbucks sells? And then basically we came up with the conclusion that we tried to find out what people liked, what their interests were. And when it came time for a reward, we would give them the kind of reward they wanted. For example, Harry liked fishing, so we would give him a gift certificate to the bass fishing shop or something. And you got to remember there's a difference between incentives and rewards. Incentives are provided up front, so create an interest in the people doing the work. And the reward is the recognition that's afterwards. So if you blend the two of them correctly, the right kind of reward, and you provide the reward and pitch it as an incentive in the beginning, and then you probably have a winner. So again, his theory was E times I times V, which is expectancy. So the employee would believe that they could do it. Instrumentality, believe that the performance leads to outcomes. Do I believe I will be rewarded for my performance? And valence, to the extent one values the outcome. Do I value the reward? So once again, can I do this? And if I do it, will I be rewarded? And then what will I be rewarded with? So again, this management business has a lot to do with the psychology of individuals and groups of people. And here's a blown up version of that illustration. So again, in your jobs, if you're working with employees and you did want to have a short-term, let's say, contest or incentive program, you'd really have to think about what it is that would drive their behavior. I mean, sometimes if you want to play it safe, you give them a gift certificate to somewhere, something that they probably would like, or their partner might like. So again, in reward systems, it's what's in it for me if you're going to try to reward somebody or incentivize their behavior. And it's important to consider there are people that thrive on intrinsic awards, values, such as and praise, things that have to do with their internal value systems. Then there's other people that basically say, give me some type of money or prizes. I think it was one of you that strongly stressed in your discussion board that it's money that talks. Give me the money. Don't tell me that you're a team player and we feel great having you here. So there's a difference in those two categories, and you got to be able to figure out which one is the motivator. Probably a proper blend of both might be what's the order of business. So now we'll talk about another pioneer of management who is Elton Mayo. Now, Elton Mayo was British originally, and he was an industrial psychologist. And he was very interested in work environments, things like that, and also the sociological relationships between workers. As I said, he was born in Australia, basically was British by citizenship, and he wrote a book called The Human Problems of an Industrial Civilization. And again, he was concerned with factories. And he did loads of research on, in fact, one of them was the Hawthorne Works, which was a manufacturing electrical component factory. And he basically did these studies over a period of 8 years. And what he was trying to do was measure productivity with the external environment. For example, changing the lighting systems, changing the amount of noise in the environment, changing the work hours. And he had all these different tests that he was doing. Now, what he concluded, and again, this is a list of all these different tests, that the biggest influencers were that group relationships affect individual performance more than physical environment and wages. So in some of his studies, you saw there were, I think it was 4 of them there over those years. He found that the groups that would collaborate on technical problems associated with productivity, they had better working relationships and better productivity than all the other experiments that he incorporated that had to do with environment. So he focused on people and the relationship with people and concluded that these relationships were more important than the physical environment. Now you have to ask yourself, what would Hershberger say about that? With his hygiene factor. So some of these things might be in conflict. The truth is, I don't think you can embrace one of them. You have to know they exist and try and take them into consideration. So he felt that interactions with peers and management, that management interests in the people and respectful treatment from them was important, group decision making, and then freedom to express views and overall collaboration. He felt these were the biggest influences to productivity and a better work environment. And again, that's very similar to Oishi's theories in Theory Z that has to do with people working together well as groups in a collective environment. Now we're going to examine the theories rather briefly because we're going to talk in more detail in our next module. But these are the teachings of Ken Blanchard. And basically, he believed that the management pyramid should be flipped. In other words, that the manager should exist to support, train, and service the worker, so that in many ways, the way the worker feels about themselves and the company and their capabilities are very sound because of the support that the manager provides. Now, he wrote the book, The 1 Minute Manager, and then umpteen other books, and ended up probably as one of the most influential management pundits over the last 25 years. And here's a quote from Ken. He says that in the past, a leader was a boss, but today's leaders must be partners with their people. They no longer can lead solely based on positional power. Amen. And this is the pyramid that I talked about. The traditional is that the role of the manager is top down. And here the employees are up here, and top management exists to support the employee. So again, one of his other theories had to do with what he called, situational leadership. And one of his, I think, kind of profound statements when considering employees is there is nothing so unequal as the equal treatment of unequals. Pretty clever. You got to think about that for a minute. But again, we'll talk about this in detail. But I think this is one of the most important illustrations in managing people. Let's say, for example, you take a person that is not motivated and does not know how to do the work. And let's say you take a person that knows how to do everything and is highly motivated. There's a different approach to managing these type of people. For example, if a person's just learning how to play a clarinet, you teach the fundamentals. But if you're a virtuoso and you're mentoring a fellow virtuoso clarinet player that asks for some coaching, you're not going to teach them how to play the clarinet, but you might be able to identify something wrong with his mouth or jaw or whatever the case may be. So that means you would be applying directive behavior to someone who really don't know what they're doing, a person that kind of knows what they're doing, so you coach them, the ones that know how to do the work, so you just say, hey, I'm here if you need me. And the other one is, here, I want you to handle this, and don't bother me unless you got a couple questions. So here are the levels I referenced. D1, that's low competence and high commitment. Remember, when you get a new employee and you're onboarding them, you should always consider, because you don't know what they're like, that you might apply some directive behavior. So low competence and high commitment. Maybe I didn't explain that right. Let me just show you one thing. So right here, again, we'll go over this, but if you look here, highly directive. This is for the employee. He referred to him as S1. I'll go over it in our next module. But if the employee really wasn't very good or brand new, he called him an S1 and he applied highly directive behavior. If they were not that bad, then supporting behavior would be required, which he called coaching, and so on and so forth. As I said, we'll go over this in detail next module. But basically, the categories of people would be low competence and high commitment, low to some competence and low commitment, moderate to high competence and variable commitment, and high competence and high commitment. For each one of these categories, you would apply a certain management style. And again, that has to do with recognizing the capabilities of your employees. And it also points to the importance of a forward-thinking and constructive performance review so you can evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of an employee before you apply a certain type of management style. As I said, next module we'll talk about these in detail, but really summing all of this up, it boils down to people management, process management. And again, the key points on the people side have to do with security and safety, fellowship, respect, reporting clarity, etc. And on the process management, let's go from the bottom: clear goals and objectives, feedback about their performance, clear direction, and training. And of course, manageable processes. So, and again, one here that's important in process, and this goes back to the Gilbreths that we studied: clear procedures, ergonomics, fatigue management, human factors, and recognition. Oh my, how complicated, huh? Also, under people management, appreciation, collaboration, environment, development. These could serve as your checklists as you're running a department, trying to figure out what you are contributing as a leader, a manager, or a supervisor. And thus, what will be your list? Okay, so now I'm going to go through a couple of other categories here. This is modern scientific. Now, forget what I just have been teaching. Let's move into a whole new room. Looking at process management, there was a person by the name of Philip Crosby who worked for ITT under Hal Geneen for decades. And he was a quality man. In fact, he wrote a book called Quality is Free. And this is something I want you to think about. You know, people talk about Nordstrom's. If you don't like something, you take it back, we'll give you another one. Well, remember one thing: you sold that transaction to a customer and you have expenses. You paid the salesman to sell it. You paid for the part. You might have financed your inventory, etc. So basically, and I'll just give you an example. At Honda, we were shipping bumpers to dealerships. And in order to lower the shipping costs, we were trying to optimize the load. So our people were trying to insert more bumpers into a crate. So there would be less need for further transportation later. But the word insert became jammed. They were jamming bumpers in there and damaging them. And I used to say to our people, following Crosby's line of thinking, now that bumper, our people had to pick, pack, and ship that bumper. We had to transport it 30 miles to a dealership. The dealer had to send it back to us, which we give them credit for. Then we had to receive it, put it away, and then repackage another one and send it back to the dealer. How much did that cost? Or let's say, for example, a hot meal served cold. You know, employees, you know, shooting the breeze with their friends in the back of the kitchen, serves a cold meal. Then they have to go back, probably throw the meal out and make another one and sell it. So rework is important, and quality along the way is important. And in fact, I always would say, why are we measuring defect rate as a percent? Why don't we measure it in dollars? And why don't we make that visible to the employees? I mean, there's a place for the percentage calculation. But why don't we explain to them that our mistakes cost money, and here's how much it cost last month? And that would be a great target for, let's say, a work group. You know, where you say to them, we want to reduce that number by 50%, and to break it down, it could be bumpers, it could be brake shoes, whatever. but here's an incentive for you to do that. And you'd be surprised how it works. So again, this is a chart that we used at Honda, and it was called the price of nonconformance. That means non-conforming, not conforming to customers' needs. And again, we had done that, and we had figured out it was $16,574 of things we had to rework again. So extremely important, and most people, they just don't get it. They like to show graphs about percentages, but the actual dollars, or whether it be the amount of hours that went into it, or miles driven a second time, whatever it is, these things constitute the price of nonconformance. Okay, now we're going to kind of wrap it up here as we talk about people. And George Odiorn wrote a book called MBO, Management by Objectives. And he stressed the importance of the performance review. And performance reviews quite often are done in a rather perfunctory way, like, oh, wait a minute, it's that time of year, you guys got to have these in by Friday, otherwise nobody will get a raise. Then they hand the employee, or maybe they don't give them anything. Maybe they give them a review without even talking to them. They hand them the review and say, sign here, and that's it. But Odiorn believed if an employee is going to be a fabulous resource, under management by objective, the supervisor would sit down with the employee and discuss what their job responsibilities are and what they're going to try to do in the next quarter or a year, half a year. So that meant that both the supervisor and the employee would agree to the reasonability of these types of objectives. And then both would be monitoring these and then collaborating along the way and applying what you might remember from another lecture, the PDCAA, a Deming wheel, which is plan, do, check, act. So with this employee, you would create some objectives. They should be smart, measurable, attainable, realistic, trackable. And once those are in place, it's the job of the supervisor to coach the employee along the way. And you'll see how this all comes together when we discuss Blanchard in our next module. And then on the Japanese side, once you hit a goal, they were very interested in continuous improvement. So Kaizen meant getting better all the time. So again, we're talking about quality processes. And again, the Deming wheel was important. And we talk about him, and these are some of his credentials. He had a partner named Joseph Juran. And there's a video, if you would like to watch him on YouTube, who you can hear about his approach to quality planning, quality control, and improvement. So that's about it. And again, there's quality societies, American Society for Quality. So I want to flip back for a minute to the performance review process. And Deming had basically said, a man should never be appointed to a managerial position if his vision focuses on people's weaknesses rather than on their strengths. The man who always knows exactly what people cannot do, but never sees anything they can do, will undermine the spirit of the organization. So, again, I just mentioned this before, but I can't stress enough the importance of a good performance review, especially if it's done in a forward-thinking, constructive, developmental way. And some of the problems that you see now, the review is performed annually with little periodic feedback, or it could be submitted often late without employee review, or they ask the employee to do their own self-appraisal and then don't do anything with it. Often reviews fail to document poor performance. Give you an example. Every time I wanted to fire somebody, I found out that their supervisor and the supervisor before that supervisor gave them glowing performance reviews. But if you talk to any one of them one-on-one, they said the person was a poor employee. And other problems have to do with forced distributions linked to compensation. And this part is probably the most problematic. The review fails to suggest going forward. So anyway, we're going to stop here with this. Boy, we covered a lot of ground today. But please take your time to go through this presentation. And the good part about it is you can revisit it at any time. You can pause it, look at some of the illustrations. And I hope some of these management theories are now all coming together for you. And combined with your reading assignments in the textbook and your essays, reflection papers, your thought-provoking quizzes, and your discussions, that it's all coming together for you. I'm asking you, as you go forward, to try and consolidate your thoughts. In other words, a lot of here has been said, but there's essentially major categories that I need to think about as I develop as a manager. Okay, now, if any of you have a question, just drop me an email. And I'm hopeful that you're finding the course rewarding for you. By the looks of your assignments that I've been receiving, it looks like you are applying a very conscientious effort to the work. And it's good, makes me feel great. And it's good for you to continue this way so you get the most from the class. And don't forget, make sure that you keep some of these things, so that you have your own management toolbox when you get done. So I believe that's it for now. I want to wish all of you the very best. And again, thank you for being in my class.